Let's talk a little bit about what your relationship actually looked like. We've alluded to how awful it was, but I think people would like to hear some concrete examples of some of the things that he expected you to do, some of the things that you were told to do, trained to do, as your book would say. One of them that stood out to me was he started to tell you you had to call him my lord. And I'm like, what is it? Your life, I felt like, was a culmination between Game of Thrones and Handmaid's Tale. It was
Yes.
at every turn I was like, this can't be real. Tia, this can't be real that you had to live through that. I guess I just want to say before we even dive in that I'm so sorry you had to deal with all of that, and I'm so happy that you're speaking out and giving voice to people who may not even realize that it's not okay.
That's exactly why I do it. I'm trying to rip the veil down. You know, you used my wedding veil as the example there, and I really am trying to tear the veil so that people can see. If you choose a Christian patriarchal relationship, it should be with full knowledge of what you're getting into. And they don't lead with, this is what it's really like to live in Christian patriarchy. I call my life often the prequel to The Handmaid's Tale. So it's interesting that you picked up on that, because that's exactly what it feels like. And the control intensifies very gradually and seemingly rationally. Every single thing we got into had very revered pastors and people in authority that were validating it. They all were connected, interconnected, so that we weren't like leaping from one belief system to another system, but rather narrowing as we went in, which really just matched my entire Christian experience, was that it narrowed and narrowed. And they say that narrow is the way to salvation. You know, there's no alternative, that there's no other way to be Christian than the way that they present. And so it seems to make sense. It seems to solve problems. And the most important thing about fundamentalism is that it answers with organization and structure the chaos of a disorganized life. That's true on the wider scale in our society, but it's definitely true in a relationship. And that's why my new husband was so attracted to it. He was a chaotic, disorganized person who needed an external locus of control, and fundamentalism gave him a very satisfying one. Not only would it help him manage and maintain order when he was overwhelmed, but it also conveniently suited him because he was a male and he would get to be in control. He didn't have to trust anyone else or submit to anyone else, which both of those things would have been really hard for him. He wasn't mentally stable, and that's a factor in this story. And I would argue that most patriarchs aren't mentally stable. They're supported and propped by this system that helps them cope and helps them stay in control. But if we actually look at the psychological records of psychopathy and borderline personality disorders and narcissism, it's rife. That is a very fertile field for mental illness, and fundamentalism gives them a coping mechanism to get through life, you know. And so that's what happened from the start. Our wedding night was an assault. He couldn't manage to be a young husband. Everything was very overwhelming to him. And then we had 9 pregnancies in 14 years, 5 surviving kids, 5 live births, and 4 surviving children. So there was a lot of just regular, ordinary family chaos that needed a solution. And fundamentalism at every point offered us a way to manage our home, clearly define our roles, be pleasing to God and to one another. And so there were always these answers for the problems. And this is coupled with all of the faith teaching that listeners might already be aware of, where if you're overwhelmed, you should pray and ask God to answer your problems, and that God answers prayers through people, and he'll provide you with mentors and books and resources. And so it was an entire ecosystem that nurtured that kind of control. And that's why I don't think my experience is very rare. And when I listen to survivors coming out of it, I hear a lot of Me Too's, including in the most extreme, severe parts of my story. I get letters from people who experience the exact same thing. And the only difference is that I've done the psychological work to be able to say it without re-traumatizing myself. And I also have the moxie and courage to say it because I'm so convicted that there are people who are living in it that need to hear what it's really like, especially when it's playing out in our headlines and in our culture. And this is coming for us. Like the life that I ran away from, that I wrote this book about, in 2 years' time is now playing out on our national stage. And people don't know what it's really like to live that way.
Yeah.
You'll hear me say a lot in my work that I believe the Christian patriarchy wants to run America the way they run their homes. And that's why it's so important that the people who have lived in those high control homes are able to say, well, this is what it's like. If you want to live this way, this is what you're signing on for.
Yeah, and let's get super specific about what it is that they would be signing on for. Because, again, like I said before, I read your book, I thought I knew what patriarchy was. And then I read your book and I go, oh, I had no idea. The absolute level of control.
They sell it so well. There's this push online right now for in both the trad wife movement, which makes it so lovely and aesthetic and gorgeous, and especially when they involve children who are so sweet and kind and beautiful, and like motherhood is such a core of this in the trad wife movement, but then also in the complementarian theological argument areas, especially with like the Presbyterians and the Reformed Presbyterians, Covenant Reformed Presbyterians. As much as Ginger Duggar, she's really following my theological trajectory. And so when her book came out and it was Becoming Free Indeed, and I was like, but you're a Calvinist in Reformed theology, and that's when my story really gets even darker.
Right.
We really get dark when we get into the Presbyterian world. They preach complementarianism, and it seems like it makes sense and that it's not so bad. So these strict gender roles and the idea that men and women are created equal, but we have different strengths, and so we have to serve according to our gender. That doesn't mean that the men can do the dishes and the women can fix cars. That means only men will do the manly things and only women will do the womanly things. And that lulls you into thinking that that's an orderly way to run a home. And then when they take away our right to work, like women, these are common things. Here's some common things that are in the news that are absolutely stem from this kind of patriarchy. Women won't have the right to vote. You won't have the right to work. You won't have the right to contraception of any kind, any birth control. Of course, abortive healthcare is not allowed, and they're working really hard on that right now. I get a lot of pushback, like, vote? Like, why would they take away a woman's right to vote? It's called head of household voting, and in highly patriarchal homes, women don't vote. The husband votes for the family because her vote could override his if they don't vote the same. Also, she's seen as property. So in a patriarchal society, women are seen as vessels and tools to serve the patriarchy, and you are the property of your patriarch. It has these very practical, everyday implications that impact how women are educated. I had this series of videos, things my Gothard funding mentors said I could skip in order to have a Quiverfull, and it's about 50 items and growing. I could continue this series for a year of things that you might take as normal child rearing responsibilities that would make you limit your family size or want to put the most of your resources into your children so that you can be good parent and show up for your child and meet their needs. And in the Quiverfull mentality of the Christian Patriarchy with IBLP and the other groups that I was a part of, they just, really encourage you and nurture you to not do those things because we're making parenting harder than it has to be. And if it makes you limit your family size, then it's not as important as family size. So this would include things like going to pediatrician, the dentist, educating your daughters, waking up in the middle of the night. The idea behind hyperscheduling a newborn is so that you can get the baby to sleep at night so that you can be sexually available for your husband so that you can have the next baby. That's why they're sleep training their infants. It's so they can have the next baby. That's why you'll see these pregnancies, boom, 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 boom. It's all a means to an end, and nothing in the patriarchy is for nothing. So if you see them do it, there's an agenda behind it.
Wow. I mean, even just not taking your kids to the pediatrician, they want you to have all the kids, but not necessarily do what's best for the kids. And it's this weird contradiction. Mm-hmm. And you would think that they would want you to be more educated so you could teach your kids more. And even just one of the conversations you were having with a girlfriend who was trying to teach you, or maybe it was Judith, the one who was kind of your mentor for the IBLP, where you're not supposed to even have conversations too much with other girls because you may get ideas that may take you away from your home, or you may gossip, and that's not what the Lord wants. And it's just so hyper controlled where you can't do anything